Alright, what's going on everyone out there on YouTube, NES Ruler, and welcome to a brand new review. And this time around we'll be checking out a film that was sent to me review by Unearthed Films, and you can pick this up right now on Blu-ray at all your favorite online retailers. It is a film from 1991 titled Evil Death Trap 2. So we did an episode of these films, of this trilogy, on the 22 Shots of Moods and Horror at the beginning of the year. I think it was like January. So I saw this film pretty recently. And I remember we were talking on that episode of how much we would have loved to see a Blu-ray release of this film from Unearthed Films, considering they released the first film on Blu-ray. And not too long after that episode, they announced this release of Evil Death Trap 2. And I think this film coming out right now is, it couldn't have come out in a more interesting time period, especially here in the States where we have the overturning of Roe versus Wade. If you guys have seen this movie talks a lot about women's rights and, women being able to choose and things like that, and past trauma and things like that revolve around pregnancy and women's rights and things like that. So I feel like this movie coming out right now is it's quite an interesting and important time to release this movie, I feel like, because it's super prominent right now in the media. So basically, Evil Death Trap 2, a really interesting, Japanese giallo inspired kind of film. It definitely has an aesthetic of a giallo. It's very bright. Neons flood this movie. It's just a neon filled film, which makes sense because it takes place in Japan in the 1990s. Technology was huge in Japan as it is still today, but it just floods the streets with neon, and it creates an aesthetic that's very similar, or at least color scheme wise, to a giallo film. But basically we follow our main character, Aki. She is a film projectionist in this small town in Japan. And there's a killer on the loose, and what this killer is doing is just going around and cutting out women's uteruses and ovaries, and basically generally mutilating them. And of course, as we learn as the film goes on, it's Aki. And one day in this theater, she sees this little boy sitting downstairs through the little glass in the projection booth. She notices this is a little boy. And as she goes downstairs, he vanishes and he disappears. And as the film goes on, we start to see this little boy appear in more and more scenes, just in different places in the background and things like that. And Aki's friend is a news reporter who is covering these series of murders that are happening in this town. And basically learn that she's pregnant. And she basically decides to keep the baby, and that's where the whole women's rights choosing, because Aki, as we learn out, is ultimately the killer. And she goes around and she rips out women's uteruses, and there's clearly past trauma. She's definitely my favorite word, sexually frustrated character. She definitely had some sort of sexually abused trauma to her in the past. You could just tell when men try to get close to her and touch her and things like that. She reacts in a very nervous way, and you could tell that she has some sort of past trauma, and maybe that's why she is interested in going around and ripping out women's ovaries and uteruses. But it's basically just that. It's Aki going around doing her thing, and her friend ultimately starts to lose her mind as well, and it leads to this crazy 20 minutes or so in the last third of the film that's just pretty batshit crazy, if I have to say. It's a really insane ending to the film. And I remember when we reviewed this on the podcast, I really didn't get much of this movie the first time I watched it. I understood what it was trying to say, and I understood that it had some deeper messages, but it's a very experimental, open-ended kind of film. And I thought, maybe the second time I would watch it, I would get a little bit more out of it. And sure, I picked up on a little bit more things, but at the end of the day, it's still a very loose-ended, own interpretation kind of a film. But it doesn't mean it's bad. I think it's an interesting film. Will I watch it a third time? I'm not entirely sure at this point. Like I said, I've seen it twice now in a year. I might give it some more time to let it sit in my brain, give it a watch who knows when. But it's definitely a film that I feel like is important for today and what is going on here in the States. It's a really interesting movie, and it definitely has some things to say. So the Blu-ray transfer, it's okay. It's nothing like amazing. It's a really low-budget film. I wish it was a little bit better because of the film aesthetics with the neon and all that. I feel like the transfer could have probably been a little bit better. But compared to the DVD that I watched when we did this on the podcast, it definitely looks a lot better. And it comes with the original mono and stereo, and that's another thing that is a little bit unfortunate. That's all you get. You get the photo gallery and the trailers on this release. I really would have loved to see some features on this movie, especially because of the fact that there's so much going on with its narrative. I think some sort of video essay or something like that would have been really interesting with this one, or a little booklet with a little written essay or something like that. I feel like it would have been really, really cool to have a release of this film that had some features. Unfortunately, there's nothing on here. But is that because of the fact that it's hard to track down people who made this film? Who knows? I'm not an expert on Japanese cinema, but it's unfortunate. But you release, you get your slipcover that you usually get numbered, and you get your Blu-ray with the same cover art, and you get your disc with no reversible cover art. So, Evil Death Trap 2, a really interesting film. I'm glad I watched it now again. I feel like I said, I got a little bit more out of it in the second watch, but it's one that I probably will never fully grasp. But I feel like that's kind of like a case with a lot of these Asian cinema films. They're kind of hard to fully get. But that's my review of Evil Death Trap 2. I hope you guys like this review. Please give it a thumbs up. And as always, you can follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/NESRuler22. Hope everybody's doing well, and I should talk to you guys soon. See you guys.